This is the first online event in the FSR Insights series. And those that have followed it before, they know that this series always starts from FSR researchers. And in this case, it's Valerie and Nicolo, and both of them have a question. So Nicolo has been thinking a lot, you know, he had some holiday and he thought, you know what, I think on digitalization of energy infrastructure, I know a lot, but maybe I can learn also something from Telecom. And then he thought very carefully, like, who could be an academic discussant on Telecom? And then we found Volker. So what do you need to know about Volker? Well, Volker did not immediately dive into digitalization. If I checked his profile, he's now at TU Berlin, but he started as an economist and only then ventured into what you could call more internet issues, sharing economy, and became a telecom expert. And he's now a postdoc in Berlin, but he's also connected and heading a research group at the Weizenbaum Institute, which is specialized in all topics related to digitalization. So then we have Valerie. So the second part of this webinar is Valerie. She has an equally interesting question because she thought, you know, in energy, data interoperability is really a key topic this year and already last year. But maybe we can learn something from healthcare, right? And then, okay, again, searching who can be our healthcare expert. And we were very happy to find Angelina. Now, Angelina, unlike Volker, already was going into a healthcare direction from the beginning. She didn't wait until later in the career to go in that direction. She even studied biology, I read, and then medical informatics to then do a PhD in a business school at Cambridge on healthcare information. So she's really working on this for a while. And she's now currently in Greece, back in Greece at an institute. And you see it there, nice logo, the ICS 4th. And it stands for Institute of Computer Science. And there she's also working on research. So we have two researchers, we have two discussants, everything we need for an FSR Insights episode. So let's just kick it off. And Nicolo will give a short intro. We will have a poll, and then we will have the comments by Volker. Then we go to Valerie, again, short intro, poll, and comments by Angelina. Go ahead, Nicolo.
Yes, thank you. Let me share the screen. Oh, sorry. Just a second. I got looking for the slides. Here we are. Let's. Sorry for the. Okay, so. Hello, good afternoon to everybody. As Leonardo told you, I will make a short introduction on digitalization of energy infrastructure. As most of you are aware, this is one of the major trends nowadays in the energy sector of the 21st century, but actually not only of electricity or gas, it affects all the network industries. So the industries where there is an infrastructure that we rely upon in order to deliver the fundamental service. And the idea to look at this topic came in the context of the so-called DGEX project, a project that 1.5 years ago, two professors here at FSR decided to start, Juan Montero and Matthias Finger. They thought, let's look at digitalization from the point of view of infrastructures, from the point of view of the managers of those infrastructure. And let's try to compare to see what is happening in the different industries. Well, we did it, and that's where we met initially, actually, Volker. And all start from a very basic statement. The digital technologies allow us to produce, to transmit, to process, to use data, to take decisions in a much faster and quicker way than previous analog technology. So the result of the adoption of digital technologies is really that we have much more data, much more data, and that we can use it much more. Implications are far-reaching because you can improve the efficiency of what you were already doing, and maybe you can also do new things. So transformative implications can be quite as important as, let's say, the simple increase of efficiency or cost reductions. Importantly, digitalization is not happening overnight, is not affecting all the network industries in the same way, is not affecting a specific industry everywhere in the same way. There are areas where you have the situation is more advanced and other where it's less advanced. And this brings me actually to the question that I have for you. So now you have to answer. I simply ask you this. In which area of the following three is digitalization of the energy infrastructure more advanced? It's in the supporting of coordination within a decentralized sector, is in enabling a more efficient management of networks, is in empowering final customers like you and me, or maybe facilitate the entrance of new players. So if we can launch the poll and let the people answer. Of course, the answer, I mean, it depends. We developed a view by researching on this topic. Maybe it's not the ultimate view, but at least I will try to support it after we know what you vote. Chiara? The result is quite straightforward. So we see first enabling a more efficient management of networks. Then a lot of people answer, some people answer empowering final customers and new entrants. And finally, the smallest group answer supporting the coordination of a decentralized sector. Perfect. It's quite close to what is my opinion about that, but not perfectly matching. Let's see how and why. First, I want to make another very short statement. Digitalization is a buzzword in energy nowadays. Actually, already 2 or 3 years ago, there were a lot of discussions about it in Brussels and all over Europe. But energy companies are not latecomers in digitalization, or not absolute latecomers. Actually, electric utilities started digitalizing some of their, let's say, larger assets already several decades ago. You see in the top right figure, the control room of the previously vertically integrated electric utility in Italy. And this figure is from the mid-90s, so quite a long ago. But then you could say that smaller assets were digitalized or are being digitalized much more recently. And again, bottom right, you see the first generation smart meter in Italy, but still 15 years old. And then the Google Nest smart thermostat, which is probably 7 or 8 years old, and it's spreading all around. So digitalization came in waves. It led to an explosion of data in the energy sector. But for the moment, we are still missing a uniform development across all the areas. And now you will see what is my first answer to the poll I made. Actually, it's consistent with what a large majority of you answer, enabling a more efficient management of networks. Indeed, the deployment of sensors, of communication networks, the use of analytic softwares like including artificial intelligence-based predictive tools, they all allow to increase the observability and the predictability of energy networks. The use of smart control devices allow to increase the possibility for network operators to control remotely and often automatically the individual elements of the grids, and so improve their operation. Here you see a list of what they can do, what system operators can do in a digitalized energy system. They can improve the planning of the network. They can implement targeted maintenance of the networks. They can solve faster outages. They can, and this is interesting, maximize the capacity they now offer to network user. And you see here a picture, a representation of how the dynamic thermal rating works. We put sensors on a electric line. We know better what are the environmental conditions on that line in real time or close to real time. And then we can we can know better how much capacity, what is the maximum amount of capacity that we can effectively allocate to network users without running the risk of breaching any security limit. And by doing this, we can be much less conservative than before digitalization. Last thing on this, digitalization started earlier in transmission level. Now distribution grids are definitely catching up. Second, supporting coordination of a decentralized sector. And here it's a bit different from what you answer, only a minority selected this, but we think it's particularly important because digital technologies allow you to share data and very important to support transactions. Platforms often are marketplaces, digital platforms rather new marketplaces. And this is particularly important for, let's say, difficult commodities like electricity. And the beginning of the wholesale markets for electricity 30 years ago was supported also by digitalization. We developed wholesale markets and we went a long way from there, because you see in the map today in Europe, a single price algorithm link the various power exchanges across most of Europe and allow to define the prices and quantities for electricity in the day ahead. But it's not only this. We have also digital platforms that increase transparency and trust in markets, like the transparency platform developed by ENSOE. Basically, it gathers a lot of data on networks, operation, on market operation, and so on, and provide basically data and information to all the stakeholders. They can better understand what is going on in the network, and therefore they can play better in electricity markets. And finally, we have a digital platform to manage consumer data. Consumer data are exploding, are becoming much more valuable than some years ago. And now we are developing also data hubs and the like to enable the sharing of those data and support innovative and dynamic retail markets. Finally, empowering final customers and new entrants. Well, digital technologies reduce transaction costs. They improve the controllability even of the tiniest asset, what we call retail size assets, your car, your fridge. And these allow to develop new products, new services that target the specific needs and preferences of individual customers. You don't sell anymore a commodity, kilowatt hour, but you can start selling a service, energy as a service. This is fundamental to promote the integration of vectors and final uses. This gives, of course, more transparency and more options to customers, either individually when they act alone, or maybe even collectively if they want to build a community, an energy community, and do something together. Last comment, these also empower new entrants, because most of these data-driven new business models are rather asset light. You don't have to invest much in physical capital. So barriers to entry are lower, but success is not guaranteed. And revolution is not fully there. Most of our customers, including myself, I do not buy energy as a service. I really buy dumb kilowatt hours, but things may soon change pretty significantly. And that's all from my side.
Thank you, Niccolò. Now, so we've seen from Niccolò what digitalization means in energy. According to Niccolò, it's quite in line with the public. We are advanced in some areas, maybe a bit less advanced in others. There is a bit of a stereotype that we can learn a lot from Telecom, Volker. Is that true?
No stereotypes, first of all. And may I say thank you very much, Niccolò, for this very interesting presentation. And thank you very much for the kind invitation to participate in this great event. So for starting the discussion, okay, I of course put a lot of thought in that. And so I decided to go for a sort of comparative approach, providing insights into the state of evolution of the internet ecosystem as a foundation for comparison and discussion of Niccolò's presentation, and also a bit like the handbook chapter I was allowed to have a look into, and also referring to the poll result, the efficiency of network management. And since I only have 5 minutes, which has given me, as I said before, a truly hard time in preparing, I would like to enter directly in medias res. So the internet and its associated ecosystem have evolved into a key component of our global communications and computing infrastructure. Today, it connects rapidly growing numbers of end users and devices and comprises a very complex amalgam, an interplay of interconnected and complementary computing and communication network resources, or servers, but also links, switches, routers, and so on. These are operating at multiple, partially overlapping layers, so it's complicated there, right? But importantly, many of these resources are independently owned and managed by different, often competing entities that might be engaged in horizontal or vertical relationships. So you might have interconnections as an example for a horizontal relationship, or vertical relationship would be you have a platform, for example, and a complementary, which probably have heard about, like OTT providers, over-the-top providers like Netflix. Now, one step back, digitalization and the digital transition have transformed the telecommunications industry into a highly dynamic and tremendously diverse broadband-centric ecosystem. So in stark contrast to other utilities or legacy telecommunication networks, where the provision of access to a dedicated, more or less purpose-built infrastructure could be more or less equated to granting access to a single or a small and rather static set of services, general purpose broadband platforms not only stand at the core of today's ecosystem, but they constitute platforms for innovation. They're not purpose-built. They support the delivery of an evolving range of content, applications, and use cases. So modern broadband networks drive the Internet of Things, are spurring the integration of the physical and the virtual world, and foster the smartification of physical objects, networks, and network industries. And I think this is the natural connection point to what Nicola just presented. So, but if we go one step back again, like if we see that the range of applications and use cases is widening, and this causes more dynamic, diverse, and complex demands for connectivity. If we look into quality of service, which means the transmission quality within the network, but also like in energy efficiency, mobility, security, and also computing, for example, local computing at the edge. So this has given rise to complex allocation and coordination problems. And how can the ecosystem deal with this? Now, much of the evolution of the internet ecosystem has been driven by a range of what I like to call topological innovations that have emerged, basically responding to drastically changing requirements and the inability of the basic best effort public internet to accommodate the new demands. So these innovations have changed or redefined the role of distance, and they have changed how content and applications are delivered, where data is stored and processed, and where traffic is exchanged. So a range of large cloud and content providers, Netflix, Facebook, Google, and so on, have already deployed data centers and distributed server clusters at strategically important hubs worldwide, or even perhaps within the networks of internet service providers, those guys from where we get our broadband access from. So we can say that servers and thus content, applications, and computing capabilities are being moved closer to end users and devices. This is, by the way, also part of the 5G idea that you have these local computation capabilities. Now, while these developments address the most fundamental limitation in signal transmission, namely the speed of light, we should not forget that 1 millisecond is 300 kilometers in theory. They improve a lot of things. So they improve the ability to balance traffic loads, optimize application performance, but they also imply something, and this is that traffic flows become more localized, right? So the endpoints are moving closer together, and sometimes not even leaving the network where I am, for example, connected. So I might very well get my Netflix movie from within my ISP. So the question is this internet or not, in some sense, because there's no interconnection even involved. Furthermore, we have a trend towards a private infrastructure. So large cloud and content providers, I named them again, the so-called hybrid giant providers who operate multi-layer platform ecosystems like Google, Facebook, or Amazon, but also internet exchange points where people meet or providers meet and exchange traffic. They have built private backbone networks to connect strategically important locations like data centers or interconnection points via their private links. That means connecting the idea of these distributed server architectures with private links implies a form of vertical integration. and enables providers to reduce the necessity to rely on what one can call the public internet, and also the policies of the ISPs, which often are the former telecom providers. So this also helps, of course, if you shorten the distance between the endpoints to reduce or eliminate or mitigate problems of coordination by cutting out middlemen, but also helps you to increase control over traffic, the quality, and so on. And a similar thing, again, is basically integrated in 5G, in the idea of general purpose 5G broadband architecture. So we have local cloud capabilities based on so-called edge computing, but 5G has this idea of network slicing. And this is basically an idea of virtual networks, where you also combine this local computing with, you could say, quality of service differentiated packet transmission. So what you do is basically, you have a virtual network that supports the flexible and say agile provision of a slice, network slice, which can be tailored to meet the heterogeneous demands of basically any use case in a specific sense. So you can tailor the slice, but you have many slices on the same physical infrastructure, which is, I think, very interesting. So what this shows is that in order to efficiently meet the emerging variety of demands for traffic delivery and local computation, you have the complementary role between local computing capabilities for data processing and storage, as well as quality of service differentiations within networks. So this is emphasized here. So I'm almost done. If you allow me to wrap up a bit. So the need for more extensive capabilities within networks to support ever more demanding applications is likely to grow, especially as we transition towards 5G or 6G wireless broadband networks. So given the growing role and diversity of distributed cloud and edge-based capabilities, as well as the growing role of the Internet of Things, the complexity and heterogeneity of applications and usage environments, and subsequently of networking requirements, will continue to expand. I mean, this can be expected. So broadband is becoming increasingly essential, right? We see this as well for societal and economic participation. When we look at implications for policymakers, maybe one sentence or something on it, is like that the conventional wisdom regarding telecommunications and the mental model, if you can call it like that, of the internet, how things work, especially in terms of hierarchies, market and industry structures, traffic, monetary flows, as well as value extraction, value splits, must be reassessed. We need a more nuanced understanding of the nature and relevance of the most pressing issues, and need to periodically reassess this, both from a technological side, right, and also how it's implemented to understand the economics. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Volker. As an energy expert, we always think that all the excitement is going on in our own sector, but hearing you talk about telecom, it sounds much more exciting than the average telecom bill I receive and pay and not think further about it.
It's exciting, it's exciting to me, at least.
I can see that. I can see that. Nicolo, I mean, is this the general feeling you also had? Because you've been working on this book, separate chapters, what's going on in different sectors, but it sounds as if these commonalities are quite striking. Even though the language we use is slightly different, the kind of themes and trends seem to be quite similar.
Yes, I mean, I see, and actually Volker today reinforced in me this idea, is that there are commonalities, but also one thing that is different, and probably it's because telecom is more advanced than in electricity, for instance, the sector that I know more. In electricity, we still rarely talk about private networks, private grids. It's really something, it's a niche for very limited application. Whereas by reading also the chapter of Volker, we see that the telecom infrastructure has many owners, and there are more and more parts of it that are owned not by the public utility, let's say, but by actors that are also provider of a specific service for final customers. This is different. Maybe this will come also to energy, I don't know, because you know, in energy, especially in electricity now, with this development of all these integrated services, my last slide, at the very edge of the public grid, of the distribution grid, maybe operators of these home energy management systems operators of fleets of electric vehicles and so on. Maybe in the future we'll start to build dedicated electric cables. This I don't know, but could be an option.
Yeah, and it seems also to be an option that Claire is thinking about. She just wrote in the chat asking you, and you're already connecting to it. So to what extent will digitalization maybe change or challenge what the boundary between regulated asset and liberalized asset? So Volker, I mean,
yes.
Has this happened based on company strategies? And how has the regulatory framework dealt with that? Is that controversial in telecom? Will regulators allow this to happen, or might they intervene?
I mean, is an excellent question. To what extent a business strategy is a driver of something like this, I couldn't tell you reliably because I'm an academic. But yes, one of the major issues, or most pressing issues, where this is also super important is net neutrality, because net neutrality is a regulation of the internet. And for this, you need to know what you consider being internet. And typically, it's called the Internet Access Service or Broadband Internet Access Service that's regulated. But there's also, say, a sort of unregulated garden that is called specialized service, or non-biased, non-broadband internet access data service. That means it is very important to understand like how to classify these things. And of course, regulators struggle with this because it's not so easy, right? You cannot have a clear-cut line. Plus, don't forget, this is all in flux. So there's also strategies to bypass specific things. And one thing I was looking into with some colleagues in a paper recently was whether this strategy to put servers within an ISP network. So Netflix, for example, does this, like Google does it. They have a presence in hundreds or even thousands of ISP networks. The scale is huge. So a lot of internet traffic is delivered from within an ISP network and not from outside. So the question is internet regulation, how does it apply to this? Is this a private service to the customers of this ISP or not? So I think it's an excellent question. I can give a good answer, but this is a very important distinction between what's private and what's public, and the lines are blurring. Yeah.
In energy sector, we started to call these regulatory gray areas, and with every innovation we get, we have new gray areas that then either stay gray or you have some European legislation saying it's black or white.
And one question would perhaps be, do you need ambiguity to allow for innovation? You know, it's complicated.
Yeah,
Thank you, Volker. I'll give you the last minute, Nicolo.
Well, I see, we could maybe talk for hours on this, but I see some resemblance, for instance, in electricity with the issue of, for instance, DSO willing to become a neutral market facilitator in this sense. So they would become the providers of this new common infrastructure data for the emergence of new services. So new services that not always anyway ensure that money comes back, because as I said, it's easy to enter, not so easy to scale. We saw a lot of startups in the past 10 years in energy, but to get a lot of customers to really achieve maybe the hundreds of thousands of customers is not easy. So indeed, that's why I said digital revolution is coming, but we are still not there maybe.
I said you have the last minute, but I'm going to still put quickly the question of Anna, because I really like it. So to what extent, you are from two different sectors, do you think that everything related to digital market rules will actually become sector specific or more general? What's the feeling there? Maybe Volker, you can start.
Also my feeling is that there is, in a sense, an integration, as I mentioned, like this physical and virtual space, but also like if we look at the allocation problem in the energy grids, and to what extent how you can steer flows and how you can steer to a very different extent flows in data networks. I think shows that I think there might be some economics that are comparable in terms of the build out, the rollout, but I think you still need sector specific frameworks. Yes.
Well, I don't know. I don't have a clear answer, but I see that regulators are concerned in particular for customers that may not be able to engage, maybe the elderly. And in this case, the digital service, I would say, has very specific, has very sector-specific implications in terms to access to fair energy prices, to affordable supply of energy. So this might suggest that some regulators will fight for some sector-specific rules.
Thank you, Nicolo. Let's jump now to interoperability, which always comes up when you talk about digital, but it's a very specific topic also. So please, Valerie, take us through the intro and lead us to the poll.
Thank you, Leo. Indeed, I think one important aspect of what has been discussed by Nicolo and Volker is somehow, how do we make all of this work, right? So how do we make sure that these increasing numbers of, let's call it entities in the sector, they can talk to each other and they can exchange information that is actionable. And here is where interoperability comes in. And here is also where healthcare comes in, because in the end, we could have chosen, I suppose, a couple of sectors to look at today, but energy and health, they share several, let's say, commonalities that justify the choice. And for example, on the challenges, traditionally, both sectors have been facing rather fragmented IT landscapes and data silos, and there have also been concerns about vendor lock-in when it comes to the procurement of IT infrastructure. On the objectives, traditionally, again, both sectors have not been very user-focused, but increasingly now we're talking about how to give better services to citizens. And this means in health patients, and it means consumers in energy. A commonality is also what you see on the right-hand side of the slide, is that both sectors are increasingly concerned with access to data and sharing of data, and this specifically concerns personal data. And increasingly also we're talking about cross-sector and sector-independent legislation, for example, in the context of the single market for energy that the European Commission is working on and the common European data spaces. So here's to the to commonalities between the sectors. Now, when you start searching for literature on interoperability, then one thing that you will come across very quickly is what is called interoperability frameworks. And there are many different ones, also for different sectors. And here we illustrate only one that I think is the most intuitive of the ones that I have seen so far. And basically what these frameworks do is they pinpoint you to the dimensions on which you need to think about interoperability. And they also might lead you to issues that are there, or let's say to standardization gaps that exist and that might need to be filled. I don't want to go into too much detail, but when you look at this, then it's more or less clear that we're facing a multidimensional challenge. And when we address this challenge, that also means that we have to think on multiple dimensions. And that means that we have to go beyond the technicalities of the data exchange. We also have to think about the meaning of the data that we're exchanging. And we also have to think about the context in which this data exchange is happening. So be it the legislative, political, regulatory, but also the business reality of the data exchange, because in the end, what we want is not the data to be exchanged or interoperability per se, but what we want is to deliver better services to citizens and businesses, and that is independent of the sector, whether it's energy or health. So to address this multidimensional challenge, we think that interoperability governance is key. And here in our research, we have identified 3 levels of governance that relate to these 4 dimensions of interoperability that I showed on the previous slide. I will quickly go through. So on the institutional level, we really talk about the high-level governance functions. We talk about the enabling framework, you talk about the long-term vision, and you talk about getting all the stakeholders on board. And then depending on the sector, it can also be about monitoring and reporting. When it comes to management, here we really mean how these institutional strategies are transferred into practice and into the implementation. And for that, you need sort of organizational structures and processes. And then again, depending on the sector, you also might want to implement monitoring and reporting. On the operational level, it's really about implementation-oriented activities. So we're talking about the governance. So it's not about the implementation per se, but it's about organizing and facilitating the implementation. And what we mean by that is, for example, sharing of knowledge, also sharing knowledge about tools, also educating people on tools, for example. And important to notice that these levels are not always clear-cut. And this is especially true for management and operation. So one example I want to give is when you think about role models, then I think it's pretty clear that a role model is a tool. But on the other hand, let's say the maintenance and the extension, possible extension of a role model also somehow needs to be governed. You need a process and a structure for that. And the examples that we put on the slide, I really want to say that this is not exhaustive, but these are examples of initiatives where we think that they seem to be most advanced in certain dimensions of the governance. And we're very happy to hear about others if you have other ideas about that. So what you see from the table is kind of the current state of affairs. And here on the institutional level, I would say what we say is a sort of dispersed governance, both, I mean, naturally on the European, on the national level, but somehow not very tightly aligned. And I think this only becomes clear when you look at other sectors where there is really a sort of mirroring going on between the EU level and the national level. On the management level, you sort of at the moment have these expert groups that provide recommendations. And on the other hand, you have sort of pre-existing entities that operate often also within their legal mandate, and they implement solutions for a very specific purpose or project. Interesting, I think, is what's going on in the Netherlands, because to my knowledge, they are setting up dedicated governance bodies for cross-sectoral data sharing and interoperability. And then lastly, on the operational level, I think we see again these pre-existing entities, but we also see a lot of innovation and very interesting things and initiatives going on when it comes to a standardization context and also a research context. And I think important is also that this is the current state of affairs, but there is a lot coming up and in the pipeline, and we might come back to that in discussion. But before closing, I would like to ask you what your feeling is about this interoperability governance. So do you think, oh, well, you know, this dispersed governance, it works very well and we don't need to improve? Or you have a sort of feeling that maybe on one of these levels, you can see room for improvement? I don't know yet, I don't see yet the answers, but I suppose they're coming in. Okay, very interesting. So a lot of you think on the operational level and also on the institutional level, not so much on the management level. Interesting for me, because I will quickly, as an opener for the discussion, give you my or our current view on the poll, and then you can see whether you align with that or not. So we actually think that on the operational level, we're pretty good and already pretty advanced in energy. There are a lot of very successful initiatives ongoing, and there has also lately been a sort of legislative push by the Clean Energy Package and others or are in the pipeline. On the management level, I would say we're pretty much limited to these pre-existing entities that we have and the established processes that they sort of operate in. And I think here would be room to perhaps be inspired by what is going on in healthcare, because we understand that there are very dedicated structures and processes being set up for standard-based interoperable implementation and testing. And this is not to say that we have to copy what is going on there, but it's more to say that maybe we could be inspired. And lastly, on the institutional level, I think that what we're seeing is mostly a loose alignment between the EU level and the national level. And here perhaps we could be inspired by completely other sectors like public administration, because there the European Commission has been setting up a very comprehensive framework since the mid-1990s. So perhaps there's room to be inspired from there, also taking account, of course, of the different structures of the sector. And I have to say that this is a view that we developed doing desktop research. So now it will be very interesting to hear from Angelina what she thinks about that. And I will hand back to Leo and stop sharing.
Thank you, Valerie. I'm equally interested. Angelina, are we from outside impressed by healthcare? I mean, should we be, or from the inside, it's not all that working that well? Please tell us.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be with you today in this very interesting discussion about multidimensionality and complexity and multi-layer aspects. I think we're swimming all in the same sea. And as Valerie said, it's all about services and it's all about really the citizen, and the citizen not as an entity which is outside of us, a citizen which is ourselves. So really, what is the future that we want for ourselves, for each one of us? And healthcare has been very strongly involved in this area because it is about services for the citizen. And despite this fact, the citizen, the patient, but also a person who is living their lives with some condition right now, we're moving from the idea of patient towards the idea of a person who is just having a condition, is not involved in this process. So it's very interesting because what's happening right now is that the citizen is called in, and the need to recognize the involvement and the importance of the citizen as being part of decision making. So interoperability is a fairly complex area, really very complex. And it involves change, it involves disruption, it involves a lot of social aspects which have nothing to do with the technology per se. And it involves a lot of changing in perspective. And it involves changing in perspective in terms of collaboration. How willing are we to collaborate, even when we have competing interests or competing ideas? And I think the fundamental for all this is to develop a common vocabulary in whatever we do, and to realize that improvement in services involves all of us. Improvement in services in the public sector, but also in the private sector. And I think we're looking at more of a combination of these two aspects. They stop being so separate and they becoming more interlinked. So this is very important. So interoperability is a very complex, as I said, area. The European Union has started an initiative, the interoperability of public services, as a program, funding program, to try to get the governments to see how they can provide more public services to the citizens, e-government services, and to be able to have a strong competence in the digital single market, which of course involves, as I said, the industry, the citizens, but also the public sector. So what they have done to move forward to this, they have established a framework which has been years of work in order to come up with this. And what I like very much about it, even though it's not specific for healthcare, is because it gives a picture, a simple picture of the complexity that is there. And before going to the picture that Valerie will share with us, is the idea that has guided my research all these years, the complexity science. What is very interesting in complexity science and complex adaptive systems is that systems, the idea of change inherent within the systems. So the actors within a system, the default is their willingness to change. So this is, we have to all take really deep down that change is the only thing that is certain in the world right now, and also uncertainty. So learning to navigate uncertainty and change is very important. And what complex adaptive systems theory tells us is that we need to have a few certain rules that are enough to be there towards to guide this system towards what we would call a self-organization. Now, this might sound a bit too theoretical for you, but if you think about your own personal life, we have a goal and we are moving towards achieving this goal in any area, even when we have a discussion in a group meeting, or in our family, or in our institution, or cross-border. So what we want is to establish a goal, and we want to see what are the conditions that will help us to go towards this goal. And adaptability is very important there because we need to be able and flexible to gather opportunities. We don't know all the factors ahead of time. And this is very important. This is a complete change of paradigm in terms of the way that we think, because so far, the sciences and the way that our society has been established is that it has been established as a mechanical system where we know which part, how it works, and if it doesn't work well, we exchange it with the one that works well. Well, the idea now and the way that the world really works is like an ecosystem that is in constant evolution, and there is a lot of uncertainty. So we need to be an unknown factor. So we need to be ready when the factor, some sort of opportunity comes up, we need to be able to gather it and be able to move forward. So now let's see the slide. So this is a nice simple idea that we need to look at and see that interoperability is a very complex aspect that involves legal aspects, organizational, and I would disagree with the answers to the poll today, because I think that the management level is the most important part, is really how we create communication with each other at the managerial and organizational level to be able to establish the norms so that things can happen, because policy can be there, technology can be there, but if we don't have the decision making, then it's very difficult to really move forward. Semantic interoperability and technical. So the integrated public service governance is very important because we need to establish some things that will be there in order to guide things forward. And one of those things is down here where we have the base registry. So for this, I would say that we have a cross-sectoral tool that can help us have some sort of data that will be able to be used across sectors. So this is, for example, in the citizen-based registry, products registries. In the case of healthcare, is the pharmaceutical products, for example. We can have the enterprises registry, which can really be used, but then we have the problem of data. As we go down into the more detail, we will see that it's not about only establishing the right data, but also the quality of the data. And to close my starting remarks, I would like to say that establishing interoperability in healthcare has the potential to accelerate digital transformation. And I believe interoperability in all sectors will be able to accelerate digital transformation and social change. And when things change in each sector, things will change in other sectors as well. It's very important so to have an understanding of the environment that we're working on, the systems that we operate. We have to identify the relationships. So this is very important in the managerial level to see what relationships are there, what stakeholders are involved, who is the decision maker. And we need to make recommendations for designing, redesigning the services, but we have to involve all stakeholders, including citizens, but also stakeholders who we wouldn't think initially that they would be involved in this aspect. And we need to have the right processes, of course, the supporting policies, but especially the incentives. It's very important to have incentives to know exactly why this is important, what we plan to do. So I believe that this interoperability framework has a lot to offer to the other sectors. It has also some very nice principles that are simple. For example, security by default, open data by default, interoperability by default, which when we follow these aspects when we design and new processes and new systems, then we facilitate our everyday life in general. So with that, I would like to close.
Thank you, Angelina. You just lifted interoperability from a very technical topic to a social change movement. So in terms of a pitch, that's quite impressive. Can you just, sorry, before maybe Valerie also wants to comment, but I just would really, out of research purposes, like to know on the managerial part that you say is so important. Is there any best practice from healthcare that we can take as an inspiration? I mean, we are discussing, for instance, one of the things, should we create a new entity or some body that is responsible for management? How has that worked in healthcare?
Well, I believe it has to do with which country and which social aspect we are involved in, because there are some, the COVID-19 pandemic has been very strong in showing us that change can start from the need. So there, for example, it depends what is the extent of what we want to create. If we want to go in regional level, then we can move towards a more region to region and country level. Then we do not need a centralized governing body that will set all the issues. I think it's a dance between central entities and more local initiatives. So I don't think we can say that healthcare has the best example, because each country and each region operates completely different. What is important to say is that we align everyone to the same goal. So I think this is the most important. And it's important to have the regulations there so that this goal is safeguarded, because sometimes we can have the goal, but then there will be other entities that come in and disrupt some nice things that have been established. This is why I think in terms of governance, an independent governance body that has a legislative power to take decisions in a transparent way is very important in terms of interoperability. So it goes beyond government changes, it goes beyond, but it has to involve actors from all the different fields that would have agreed to move towards that. So it's a governing body that would be centralized, but at the same time involves different people. And this is quite theoretical. There are different models, and I think each country, each sector, and each area needs to decide what is the best for them, and what is already there as a practice. So,
thank you, Angelina. Valerie.
Yes, thank you, Angelina, also for showing that figure. I find it very interesting, and I think when we look at it, then from my perspective, in energy, as I also said already a bit, we're pretty good when you look at the left-hand side of the figure. So to remind everybody that it's basically the framework. In energy, or in electricity in Europe, we would call it the ESCAM framework, Smart Grid Architecture Model Framework. But I think what we're missing is a bit the right-hand side of the figure, and that more in a conceptual way, because what we have tried to show is that indeed we have governance and we have governance elements, but I think this overall concept might be lagging a bit, let's say. And I think on the operational level, and this is also where I disagree with the audience, as I said, we are already pretty good. There are a lot of initiatives going on, but the ESCAM framework, to my understanding, has also been developed in a context of standardization, which also explains a bit the sort of limitation of that framework, because it was really developed to identify use cases, new requirements or security requirements, for example, or standardization gaps. And so indeed, it does take into account the higher levels, obviously, but it sort of takes them into account as a limiting factor within which then the implementation happens. And I think what we need to do is we need to look at the right-hand side of the figure, and we need to go beyond the operations to really look at the structures and the processes that we have been working with and that we have implemented. And now we need to see whether they are fit for purpose or not. And I think it can go in two directions. I don't know. So I think this is an open question. I think at some point it can happen that we turn around and we see and say, this has been working well. I mean, we don't need to make these improvements. Or we can also look around and say, maybe we need indeed a more centralized approach that takes also account of the different cultures in the member states, because I think this is also a sort of consensus in electricity that there will be no decentralized approach to this. And we really need to take account of what the member states have been doing for a very long time.
Thank you, Valerie. Let me start picking up some questions from the chat box. So one is from Lisa on GDPR. Is GDPR an obstacle to data interoperability? Yes or no? Angelina.
Well, GDPR, I think, is a wonderful thing that has happened to us because it shows that the citizen has rights and it creates the awareness. And I believe that GDPR can be a tool to move towards interoperability that will safeguard citizen data, which is the most important thing and the most important question right now for systems to move forward. So I think it's a good thing.
Valerie, anything you would like to add?
Just the thought that I think when it comes to GDPR, since it's across sectors, so basically sector independent, every time we talk about personal data, be that in energy or be it in health or in other sectors, we're facing the same issues. So again, I would like to stress the point that perhaps we can find a solution jointly.
Yeah. With Volker and Nicolo, we also started to talk about trends, right? Where we expect things to go. So what about data interoperability? I mean, Angelina, I don't know if you follow, but in energy, we have a new new act coming up, the Interoperability Act. So a piece of European legislation that might really push towards, I don't know, some more harmonized approach across member states or more centralized. But we do not know how ambitious that act will be. What about healthcare? What's the general policy trend? Are you expecting ambitious new projects in healthcare on data interoperability?
Well, we have a very ambitious project coming up now, actually happening in Greece. What I believe is the trend will be to create interoperability services that go beyond, as I said, the public and the private sector. So I think as a vision, I would say that we need to unify and say services in general. And I believe, like Valerie said, it's very important to learn from each sector. So when the Energy Act is put in place for data interoperability, it's very important to look at the healthcare sector, for example, and find good examples so that there is a harmonization. I don't like when I see things happening, as we said, in silos at this day and age when we know better. So I think this is the way forward. We know better now. Let's act on it.
Great. So anyone in energy that is currently drafting that act, please talk to Angelina. Of course, also to Valerie, but not only to Valerie. Valerie, you want to make a final comment?
Yeah, I think I've been talking about the current state, but I think we also have to acknowledge that there is a lot in the pipeline. And I think it's on two levels. So one are indeed these implementing acts. And as you said, Leo, we don't know what is in the draft, but what we do know is what the experts recommended. And if it follows that recommendation, then I think there is quite some advancement on the managerial level, because that sort of looks like a procedural approach. And then if you establish a core process model, core information model, core role model that the member states have to converge to, it's per definition a process that somehow needs to be governed and managed. And I think the other point, and I will close with that, is that we're also seeing increasingly sector independent legislation. So there we also might need to catch up a bit on the management level when it comes to cross-sector, cross-domain, cross-border thinking. I think, again, the operations are already thinking in that regard when you look at the Horizon 2020 bridge projects, for example, but maybe the management has to catch up a bit with the cross and multi nature of interoperability.
Great. Thank you, Valerie. Thank you, Nicolo. And great to have you here, Volker and Angelina. So from now on, the whole energy sector will contact Volker for telecom and Angelina for healthcare. There are quite a few thousands of people, so a small side effect of this event maybe. And to close, let me just thank one of these European projects that has enabled, in this case, mainly the work of Valerie, and we will continue to work on interoperability. in the framework of that project. And as I said, we are in 2021. There is many more online events going on. And here's just an overview. If you like this one, you might also like some of these other online events at Florence School. I will be back in the next episode of FSR Insights, as you can see on the bottom, 24 February, but you might want to also check out some of these others. And with that, I am happy to close. Thank you all and see you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.